Good evening. Okay. Glad you're here. Tonight we're going to have a slideshow. Jay McCarl is here, a good friend of mine. I was with Jay in Israel for 14 days, I think it was, Jay, wasn't it? 12. I was longer, okay. And I got there before him, but we were able to see sites that you normally would not see because buses don't get there. And it was a blast. We about killed ourselves, I think, climbing under barbed wire fences and all over. And the one thing that keeps standing out, I'm having nightmares right now. We're going down these roads that nobody would want to go down to. And he kept saying, it's just a rental car. It's just a rental car. And we didn't know if we're going to make it up these hills or not. So next time we do something like that, we're going to do a four-wheel drive. But let me open with prayer, and then Jay is going to do a slideshow. And at the end, if there's enough time, you have questions about Israel, anything about Israel, he'll be open, question and answer at that time. So, Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for the opportunity just to show this slideshow. Lord, we pray if there's anyone on their way coming, Lord, that you just give them safe passage and open up our minds and hearts to understand what it's like in Israel. In Jesus' name, amen. Jay, would you come on up?
Right. I'm glad to be back. I don't know. I just love Hilo. No, I'm not going to live here, but I would. It's just a fabulous place. I love the laid-back atmosphere. The moment I get here from the airport, Kathy, my wife, tells me that I have a thing called an airport walk. So I get in an airport. I've got my carry-on or my suitcase, I'm going up to the counter, whatever, and I'm going about 5 miles an hour. And the moment I get off the plane here, I just slow down to a very slow-mo because it's just so restful. I hope it's that way for you. I don't know. It appears that way from an outsider, but it's marvelous. I'm from a place called Cool, California, just like it sounds, C-O-O-L. It's not named after the weather. It gets scorching hot in the summer, and lately buildings have been collapsing because of snow load being excessive up there. So it's kind of all over the place. But Cool is named after an evangelist named Peter Y. Cool, who used to go around and evangelize the mining camps during the gold rush in California. And we happened to be right there where he was. And so at some point, somebody wanted to change the name from Cave Valley to Cool, California, and that's how we got our name, and that's where I get to come from, but it certainly isn't about the weather. But as far as from places go, as Ron was saying, that Israel is really an amazing place. There's about 10 million people in Israel. About 2.5 million of them are Arabs. When you go into Jerusalem, into the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem, it's all Jews. When you go into the Muslim quarter, it's all Muslims. When you go into the Armenian quarter, it's all Armenians. When you go into the Christian quarter, it's all what? Arabs. See, Israel will surprise you all the time, and all of those Arabs are Christians. But they're not Calvary Chapel Christians, and Calvary Chapel is not the be-all and end-all of let's go to heaven. I mean, all Christians are going to be there who profess Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. Tradition, if they're just traditional, that's another matter. And these folks are mostly traditional. So they need the Lord like everybody else, but in that quarter you can talk to them about it. And it's very exciting. Now, Israel is, I can't even begin to describe it. I've been there 30, 35 times. I run tours there all the time. I get a chance to go teach there with the Calvary Chapel Bible Institute in Katzreen. I was the director of the Calvary Chapel Bible College in Jerusalem for a semester. It's unlike any other place on earth. It's not what you'd expect. There's, as I said, 10 million people. When you land at the airport, you're thinking you're landing in Los Angeles. It's not like landing in the old world. And yet, embedded in this country are sites that are 100% authentic. Something from the Bible happened here. Sites that are probable or possible. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. Flip a coin. And there are other places where, well, it couldn't have happened here, but this is as close to it as we can get. And so we go there too. We go to sites during our Israel tour that are all biblical, except for two. And they're not in the Bible. But the Bible was there. And that makes them all most interesting too. The tours that I run are intended, and I'll get to the pictures here in just a second, but intended to take people to the sites where things actually happened, or as close to them as we can get. And now let's talk about the site. Get your Bibles open and give you an insight, not from some sort of a devotion that Ron or I could give from the pulpit, but something that you could only talk about there because it happened there. And when you go there, even these slides aren't going to do it justice. You begin to see distances, size, scale, geography. A lot of times in the Bible, half the story involves the geography. But we're just reading the Bible. It's a Sunday school lesson to us. When you get there, it's reality. And a very interesting thing happens when you go there. Your faith collides with reality, with data, and your emotions often don't know how to take it because suddenly you are forced to believe everything that you said you believe, and now it's staring you in the face. Pastor Chuck Smith used to say, and it's true, that 2 weeks in Israel is worth a year in any seminary. And it's absolutely true. Let me show you what one of our tours are like here. This is my group from my church here. So we just had a carload of people. My church is really small. It will never be big. I don't live in an area where it can be big. There's 1,000 people in the surrounding area living up in the foothills, and they live up there because they don't want to be involved. They get away from it all. So the fact that we have a church that ranges somewhere, well, if everybody showed up on the same Sunday, about 200 people, and they certainly don't all show up on the same Sunday. For us to have a group this size going to Israel was quite amazing. So this is our group. You'll see people from our group here coming, but the size of our group this past year was much smaller. Again, it wasn't a huge group of people because COVID put a stop to everything, and it takes a while to build back up over time. But this is a view from the hotel where we all stayed. Every room had this view. That's the Mediterranean Sea. That happens to be at sunrise, so you're looking west with the sunrise coming up over your shoulders to the east, and that's the type of hotel that we stay at when we go to Israel. They're just amazing places. I just thought I'd show you the modern stuff. Right up the road from that hotel is this. This is a 2,000-year-old aqueduct built by a fellow whose name was King Herod the Great. King Herod the Great was not great because he was a great guy. In fact, our tour guides are like historians and theologians, all kind of wrapped up into one person. And they have a lot of personality and are able to communicate brilliantly. He tells us, and I love it, he says, you want to picture Herod the Great? Think Danny DeVito with a crown. He's just a nasty little guy who had a self-esteem problem, and I'm not into that, by the way, but that happened to be just, he'd kill everybody around him. People even said that it was safer to be Herod's pig than it was his kids, because he might kill them. But King Herod the Great built so much in Israel around the time of Jesus. Remember, he's the one that tried to kill Jesus as an infant, that guy. He built so much on such a colossal scale that people will tell you in the Middle East that there wouldn't be any tourism in Israel if it wasn't for Herod the Great because of the scale that he built on. This is an 8-mile-long aqueduct that starts at the foot of Mount Carmel, ends up at his palace in a place called Caesarea, right on the Mediterranean Sea, just up the road from where you saw that hotel. And this whole thing brings fresh water into his swimming pool, which is built on a rock formation, an outcropping of rock that sticks out into the Mediterranean Sea. You say, why don't you show us a picture? We don't have enough time. Herod the Great built on a grand scale. This is one of Herod's great buildings. This has been completely restored, but it's our first stop. This is a Roman theater. Today it's used for regular theater productions, including plays, lots of rock concerts. I mean, our guide was very proud to say Deep Purple played there last week, and he was excited about that. But this is where we come first stop, and we get to talk about Israel and why we're here, and why is such a bloody land called the Holy Land and all of that. This is the place that Herod built. And if you'll notice right in front, you'll see some rugged steps up there. Everything's nice and smooth, but the ragged ones right there that we're sitting next to, and that's our group there, that you look at that, those are the original seats. And in this particular theater, Things happen that are in the Bible. This is where a fellow named Herod Agrippa, we know his name is Herod Agrippa the First. There were two Herod Agrippas in the New Testament. This is where he went up onto the stage in this theater, made a speech, was wearing a robe that was woven with polished silver. So when the sun came up over the top of the theater, it hit him and he was blinding light, and people started shouting, "This is the words of a God, not a man," and God struck him dead. And it happened on that stage, right there in this theater. Biblical sites all over the place. Here's the theater again. I like the picture. Somebody else took that. And, here we're talking about the Bible, and that's the passage that we're in. You go from there up to a place called Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel is a beautiful hill. It's actually 2,200 feet above that plain right there. That plain, looking down onto this beautiful green plain, is the Jezreel Valley. You know it by another name, the Valley of Armageddon. That's it. That's the Valley of Armageddon. But wait, down to the right, that cluster of buildings that you see down in there, you can't really see it well on this picture because we'd have to blow it up really, really big. There's a Levitical city called Yokneam. It's in the Bible. It's down there. It hasn't been excavated yet, but ancient cities look like hills in the Middle East. You find a hill around here, it's a volcano. You find a hill in Israel, it's a city. It's just buried because of erosion. Way in the background, you'll see a hill right in the very center of the picture, right there. That's Mount Gilboa. Now, what's the big deal about Mount Gilboa? Saul, Jonathan, they all died on the slopes of Mount Gilboa in a battle. Mount Gilboa is a place that right at the foot of it, Gideon's spring is there, where he sorted out his men by having them drink water in a certain way, and God said, "You got 300 versus 130,000. Go get them." Wow, right there at the foot of that mountain. The one to the left, the Hill of Moreh. Hill of Moreh, what's that? Well, that's where the Midianites were that Gideon attacked and decisively won by blowing shofars and waving torches around. And God took care of the rest. They all killed each other because they thought they were being attacked. And they don't have night lights there. They don't have street lamps. So the Midianites in the middle of the night, they wake up from a sound sleep and they start killing each other. Brilliant plan that God has. To the left of that, you see another hill sticking up just barely. That's the top of Mount Tabor. Mount Tabor, on the slopes of Mount Tabor, is where Deborah and Barak defeated the Canaanites in the book of Judges. To the left of that, you can't really see it, but there's a notch in the hill just to the left. That's Nazareth. That's where Jesus grew up, remember? So all of that in one site and even more. We get up on the top, and if it's not raining and cloudy like it was one time, you point to all these places, and you're seeing a whole panorama of the Bible, Old Testament and New, in just one view, and everything is within about 12 miles. It's stunning. How about this one? What's this place? Sepphoris. Well, Sepphoris isn't in the Bible. It is in a sense. This is where Jesus and his father, his stepfather, if you want to call him, or his earthly dad, that would be, of course, Joseph, would have actually worked. You say, well, they came from Nazareth. They worked in Nazareth. Nazareth was too small to employ anybody. And a carpenter didn't mean a furniture maker. It meant a contractor. And Sepphoris was undergoing a 30-year rebuilding project at the time of Jesus when he was a youth. Where did he spend his youth? With his dad in that location there. And we know this through means that I have to tell you there because it'll take too long to tell you tonight. But we know this 99% sure. Jesus and Joseph were here putting things together. But what's more important about this place? Mosaics, because it wasn't just, you think of Israel as being full of Jews and Arabs and camels, but back in the time of Jesus, they had huge metropolitan cities that were made up of Greeks, pagan Greeks, and pagan Romans, and Arabs, pagan Arabs. Remember, Islam didn't come along for hundreds of years after Jesus. And of course, Jews that were there, and just locals and natives and people from all over the world, because Israel was literally the crossroads of the world. And this was a cosmopolitan city. You had huge mansions in there with beautiful mosaics on the floor, like this one. This lady is nicknamed the Mona Lisa of the Middle East. It's such a beautiful mosaic. And this particular mosaic had over 1 million pieces in it. It was partially destroyed. But that's in Sepphoris. This is in Nazareth. This happens to be in a great big church in Nazareth. We don't go to Israel to visit churches. Pilgrims do. We're not pilgrims. We're students. We're students of the Scripture. You want to see the Bible where it happened. Absorb what's being said. Absorb the message of the Bible. And when you come back, you're so excited, you pass it on. It's infectious. That's why I love doing this, because you minister to a small group of people and hundreds, if not thousands of people get touched by people like you. These are pilgrims here. This is in the Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth, which is a great big church that was built quite recently, financed by the great benevolent saint of Israel, Frank Sinatra. Good old Blue Eyes. He helped build this church. He was actually a hardcore Zionist, and he used to go and entertain the IDF until he stopped singing and finally he passed away. And what they're at right there are the ruins inside the church of part of ancient Nazareth. So they're at a house they claim is the house of the Virgin Mary. They don't know that, but they believe it. This is the top of Mount Arbel. And we go up to this top. It's a gentle hike for about 300 yards. You get to the top. And what you're seeing in the background, see that gray area just above the guy with the black hat? That's my assistant pastor, Jim. That's the Sea of Galilee. This is your first view of it. It can be hazy. Here's a nice clear day of the Sea of Galilee. That's the north edge of the Sea of Galilee. And here's what I want to tell you about the north edge. About right where the green area down below disappears behind a rock. Just carry that on about another quarter of a mile. Follow it now to your left all the way around the top of the lake until right about the middle of the picture, at the top of the picture. That area right there and about a mile onshore is where Jesus did 90% of his miracles and 70% of his teaching. That's it. Right there. And that shook the world. Well, that's not a very big place. The whole lake is 13 miles long, north to south, 6 miles wide, east to west. And it's only 150, 170 feet deep, depending on what time of year it is. And yet the world is still trembling because of what happened in that tiny area behind my back around the lake right there. This is me teaching. I just wanted to show you this in Nazareth at the synagogue church, where over in Luke chapter 4, it talks about Jesus rolling out a scroll of Isaiah 65 and saying, reading it and saying it's fulfilled in your hearing today. This particular church may or may not be built where that synagogue was. We don't know. This is one of those flip a coin sites, but it's as close as you're ever going to get in Israel for the time being until somebody digs something else up. We actually go to that church. You get out on a boat. You go sailing across the Sea of Galilee. You get to sail where Jesus walked. That's simple. And they're a little further on. The boats go right past things like this. These are guys from a kibbutz called Engev. They're out there fishing in the old style. They're not doing it for tourists. This is what they still do. They have a motor on their boat. They have modern equipment, but they still throw nets out. They even occasionally use trammel nets to bring in the fish. And they still cook the fish for tourists. When you go to lunch, they'll actually get them right out of the Sea of Galilee. This is one of the lunches. This is just part of it. That's my friend Mark Bunger. And, of course, he's sort of my, how do I put it? He's my ramrod. He makes things work. He's the guy that actually makes all the phone calls and makes everything work on a tour. But he's sitting here in front of one of our lunches, and there's all kinds of other things that you have. This is a typical Israeli lunch, and we actually have one of those on the day that we sail across the Sea of Galilee. We dock right up at the restaurant, go up there, and we have a great lunch together. This is the Mount of Beatitudes. Is this where Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount? Once again, flip a coin. We don't know, but if you go straight south from there, right down to the edge of the lake, closest approach, you end up at a place called Capernaum. That was a city in Jesus' day, or a large town, and it was a fishing town. And this is where 6 of the disciples lived. The rest of the disciples came through there. Jesus made it his home base during the time that he was in Galilee after he moved on from Nazareth, because in Nazareth, people didn't believe in him. They wanted to kill him, in fact. This is on the side of a hill that is a very probable location for the actual Sermon on the Mount. Maybe not right there, but somewhere on this hillside, that place is close enough, and we get to talk about the Sermon on the Mount. Just to the west of that is this place. Then there was a guy, this is a Catholic site, Roman Catholic site. We have to go in different places, different people own the site. Sometimes it's Arab, sometimes it's Muslim, sometimes it's Catholic, sometimes it's Greek Orthodox, and sometimes it's just the secularist government of Israel. It's the way it is. But there was a guy digging a trench for the hotel that you see the lobby for on the right-hand side with all the glass. As he's digging the trench, he cuts into that structure. As they begin to clear away the dirt, he has to call up the priest who's running the project, and he says, we have a big, big, big problem. Because they had just cut into a first-century synagogue that certifiably Jesus preached in. That one. That's Magdala. That's where Mary of Magdala, or Mary Magdalene, came from. So this is the town of Magdala, and it was actually not just a town. They came to find out it was a city. It was the third largest city in Galilee after Sepphoris and Tiberias. You had Magdala. So big place. And it was, what was the industry in Magdala? These are the things you learn over there. What did they do there? They dried fish and exported it. Really exciting. That's what they did there. And that's where Mary was from, Mary of Magdala. This is also there. Beautiful mural there about a woman touching Jesus, the hem of Jesus' garment, and becoming healed. It's a great, beautiful mural. But I wanted to show you the floor. The floor is part of the pavement in the area in Magdala. Jesus would have walked on this pavement. We're taking pictures, and then you point out, by the way, take a picture of the floor while you're at it. Something happened here. We don't know what, but he was here. This is part of the floor, or the paving area, the paved area of ancient Magdala right there. This was found in Magdala. This is a table. It's very short. You have to sit on the floor because people didn't sit in chairs in those days. They sat on the floor. Tomorrow night at the biblical dinner, if you're here, you could sit on the floor here, bring cushions, of course, or here. Because this is like, that's the height of things in those days. They didn't sit in chairs. They didn't even sit on stools. This happens to be a table that they would have rolled a scroll out on and read. Jesus definitely spoke in his synagogue, so he would have spoken at that table. The reason for all the designs on it, it's meant to resemble in certain symbolic ways the temple in Jerusalem. That makes it an artifact of amazing order. And they have a replica of it there. That's the authentic one. That's in the hotel lobby, right next to the synagogue. We do our baptisms in the Sea of Galilee. Now, you say, well, I want to get baptized in the Jordan River. The Sea of Galilee is the Jordan River. You say, well, which has got to be one or the other? The Jordan River flows down from the Golan Heights, the Hulon Valley, and it comes into the Sea of Galilee, and then it flows out of the Sea of Galilee and is the Jordan River all the way to the Dead Sea. What is the Sea of Galilee? It's a wide spot in the Jordan River. So if you get baptized, then you get baptized in the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River. That's what it is. And so we do our baptisms there. And the water's shallow, it's warm, fish come up and kind of tickle your toes a little bit. It's a great place to be. This is Caesarea Philippi. Now we're moving up towards the Golan Heights. This is at the foot of the Golan Heights, right at the foot of Mount Hermon. And this place, lesson after lesson happened here. Jesus took his disciples up there and he asked them the question, who do men say that I am? They gave him all these answers. Then he says, who do you say that I am? And we'll talk about this tomorrow night here. Peter steps forward and he says, you're the Messiah. You're the Son of the living God. This happened right in eye shot of this location right here. Because when Jesus tells them that you're Peter the rock, upon this rock I will build my church, and he says the gates of hell will not prevail against it. That cave off to the left there, which is enormous, is where the Jordan River, which was the Banyas tributary of the Jordan River. There's three tributaries, the Banyas, the Dan, and the Hatzbani, that make up the Jordan. This was the Banyas. It used to flow out of that cave. It doesn't anymore. An earthquake changed it. But that was known as the gates of hell, for various reasons that we talk about there that, once again, don't have enough time to talk about it tonight. The guy sitting down is our guide. He's just taking it easy right there, laying back, and there's our group standing around, and we have little earpieces so we can hear him. He can talk at a normal level, and we hear it in our ears, so we don't have to shout or talk over large crowds. And this area is very crowded frequently, and so he's giving us the background there on Caesarea Philippi. This is also at Caesarea Philippi. Banyas Falls, that's the Jordan River. That's one of the tributaries of it. And when we were there this last November, it was all torn up. The platform was gone. They just rebuilt it. Now you can walk right out and get pictures like this. It's a beautiful place, one of the most beautiful places in Israel. Take a little hike down to it. This is nearby Caesarea Philippi. This is the ancient city of Dan. Now, when I use the word Tel, this is called Tel, T-E-L, Dan. Tel means mound city. So they just have one word for it, a Tel. This is Tel Dan, the mound city of Dan. Well, is Dan in the Bible? Of course it is. In the Bible, in Genesis, at the time of Abraham, it was known as Laish. This is where Abraham went through Dan to go up by Damascus to rescue Lot, his nephew, when he was captured, taken prisoner. He goes up there with his own private army, wipes out the kidnapping army, takes Lot and brings him back, and they go through Laish. That thing right there underneath that arch is the oldest arched gate in history. There's nothing older than that in the world as far as an arched gate. It's not stone, it's mud brick. And they call this the Gate of the Patriarchs because it dates to the time of Abraham and Lot, and therefore 99% sure Abraham and Lot passed through this gate many times, even together, from the biblical incident. We also go up into the Golden Heights. Here's something that is newer, and we get to talk a little bit about prophecy up there, and end times prophecy, because Israel is now a nation again. And there are all kinds of things that happen militarily and politically that are alluded to in a lot of the prophecies. This is a location known as the Valley of Tears, which has a huge story that goes on about it. You can read about it online, where 111 Israeli tanks took on a tank column of Iraqi and Syrian forces that were numbered in the hundreds. And when it came down to the end, there was only one tank left, and Israel had immobilized the tank at the rear and the tank at the front of this invading column, and then they picked them off one at a time in the middle. And so you had a handful of soldiers that were left in the end, and they had completely wiped out an entire invading tank column that was coming into Israel that could have killed, well, they could have won the war with it. This is a site called the Valley of Tears. What you're looking at, the windmills, but through those two monuments with all the names of the people that were killed in the battle, the Israelis, you're looking into Syria. If you had a good enough throwing arm, you could literally throw a rock into Syria from this location. That's how close we get to the Syrian border. Here it is again, and once again the Syrian border's there. If you see a town in the background, that's called Quneitra. It's a ruin now, but that's a Syrian town back there. And then between us and them, there's a no man's land, and there's Syria right there. This is a place called Beit Shan. We go there. It's a huge Roman city. It's gigantic. Look at this. It's huge. The thing in the background, that hill, that's another tell. That dates back into the time of Joshua and 1,000 years before Joshua. This is where, when Saul and Jonathan were killed in battle with the Philistines owned that hill, that mound. This whole Roman city was not there around it. But that hill was owned by the Philistines. That's where it's gross, but they hung the bodies of Saul and Jonathan and his brothers on the wall at the top of that city. That was an ancient biblical city that, interestingly enough, the only reason the Philistines were there is because Joshua skipped it when he invaded the country, and the Lord said, don't skip any cities. Joshua thought they wouldn't be a threat. Guess what? Learn the lesson. But this city here is a city called Skiptopolis, which is also known as Beit Shan today, and it's a Decapolis city. And in the New Testament, you find cities of the Decapolis. They're Greek, Roman, cosmopolitan, pagan cities of an enormous size. This one is the only one west of the Jordan River. And we go there and you get to see a full-blown Greco-Roman city that is in marvelous condition. You even get to see how the Romans went to the bathroom. That's a public toilet right there. Enough said about that. How about the Dead Sea Scrolls? One of the most important finds in the history of the world. The Dead Sea Scrolls that verified that the Bible that we have today is the same Bible they had thousands of years ago because of these guys called the Essenes. That outcropping of rock that you can see a little cave poked into right there, that happens to be Cave 4. They found all kinds of fragments of scrolls there in Cave 1, which is way up in those hills up there and to the right about a mile, and it's very, very difficult to get to. You have to actually have climbing gear to get in there. That's where they found an incomplete, intact scroll of Isaiah, which dated back to 200 BC, and it was no different than modern scrolls except for some spelling changes, a grammar change, and one corrupt word that they couldn't make out that didn't affect the doctrine in any way, shape, or form. They think it was a word for light. So that's the importance of the site. We stop at Qumran. How about this? Masada, near Qumran. Masada is a place that, well, the story is long. This is one of those places where I can tell you Masada, as far as we know, is not in the Bible. Then people say there's a possibility because the Bible talks about fortresses. David went to the fortress in the desert, and the word in Hebrew for fortress is Masada. But that could mean any fortress. But this is a plateau, 1,200 feet high. Can you see the cable car going up there? Get in a cable car, and you go up this thing. You know, if you're afraid of cable cars, I got to tell you, this thing, it goes way up there. But when it's moving, you can't feel it move. It's like you're standing on the stage right now. It just doesn't feel like it's moving. So we've had some pretty panicky people get on that thing, and they had a marvelous trip up and a marvelous trip down. You don't want to walk the trail going up there. It's really, really hard. It's really steep. But down at the bottom of the trail, where you can see this is the beginning of the trail, which we don't make you walk, you can see a person down there. Look at the little tiny thing, right? That trail starts at 1,200 feet below sea level. If you've heard of Death Valley is only 282 feet below sea level. Oh, by the way, the Sea of Galilee is 700 feet below sea level. This whole area is way down there. And up at the top, the last stand of the Jewish rebels in 72 AD, when they were finally caught up, the Romans finally caught up with them and wiped them out. And that was the end of national Israel until 1948. This was the last stand of the Jews. Lots to talk about up there. It's a great place to go. This is what it looks like from the air. Obviously, I didn't take this picture, but you can see it was massive, and Herod the Great built it. Even 1,200 feet up on all sides except the one on the right, where you see that white ramp going up there. That's 400 feet tall. And he put 30-foot-high double walls, casemate walls around the outside with 60-foot-high towers. Who's going to attack the side of that thing? And yet that's what he did. And, of course, Masada's last stand, there's another picture of Masada, was this ramp. Look at the people along the side of the ramp, just to the left. That's a column of people. But the Romans built this ramp with the help of Jewish slave labor all the way to the top, hauled a huge tower with an angled base, a siege tower to the top, and then rammed their way through the wall and came into Masada, expecting to be attacked by these very, very dangerous Sicarii Jews. We get the word, if you've heard the term, Sicario. That's where it comes from. It's a Spanish word that comes from the Hebrew word. These guys were up there. They're the most dangerous zealot Jews that you will ever find in history. And the Romans come through, and they're met with silence. Every one of them had died. They had all arranged for their own deaths. They did not commit suicide. Only one person on that mountain committed suicide. But everybody else helped everybody else die so that they denied the Romans a victory. And again, this is part of an astounding story. And one of the reasons Masada is so important to me, it's my favorite site on the entire tour, is not because it was in the Bible. It's not. It's because the Bible was found in Masada. And what they found there will actually bring you to tears and make you break out in fatal goosebumps when you hear it, because it's absolutely stunning. So that's Masada. From there, En-Gedi. You ever heard of En-Gedi? Ein, spring of, Gedi, the goat, spring of the goat. This is where David hid out from Saul, and Saul went into a cave to relieve himself, read, go to the bathroom. And David is in this cave with 400 guys of his men, and he manages to sneak up on Saul and cut off the hem of his garment. How so? Waterfall makes noise. The cave, there was much more of a shelf over the top of that. It's a huge area. You've got reeds. It's very wet. It's like Hawaii. Some of you know Pastor Charles Couch from Calvary, West Oahu. He loves to go here. He's coming on our next Israel tour as well. It might be all Hawaiian people. I love it. You know, but he said this place is like Hawaii in the worst desert on earth. It's an amazing oasis there, and this is where David hid from Saul and cut the hem of his garment off. We go up towards Jerusalem. On the way up, we stop at Genesis Land. You get to take a little ride to lunch if you want to take a camel. And this is our lunch there. A lot of very happy people enjoying that lunch. The guy with his finger pointing towards you is a pastor of a Calvary chapel in Napa. And they serve what, tomorrow night we're doing a biblical dinner. Well, they have full-height chairs, but they have other tables that are on the floor. This is an Old Testament biblical dinner. I'm doing a New Testament one. These guys take you back an extra 2,000 years, and they have a guy there dressed like Abraham. And he comes and you say, well, that's really hokey. It is. It's hokey. And then when people get done with the tour, they often say, we love the tour, but that was the best part of it. It's just really fun. You learn a lot, and the food is tremendous. And that's our last stop before we get to Jerusalem. There's Abraham there. His name is Yehuda, and he's from Australia. But the next stop, we go straight up at sunset, when the sun is starting to go down, to Jerusalem. And that's my assistant pastor, Jim. This is the first time this last year he'd ever been to Israel. And you can see the look on his face like, I can't believe I'm here. That's the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And here's another closer picture of it. By the way, I have to throw this in because somebody has just said some weird stuff about it. So there's a rumor going around that the Temple Mount itself, that area was actually the Antonia Fortress, and that the temple was further down. If anybody tells you that, just smile and walk away. because it is absolutely not 99%, but 100% not true. And I can guarantee it, and I can give you all the research. That's where the temple stood, presumably, where that dome stood with the blue building, which is called the Dome of the Rock. It's not the Mosque of Omar, it's the Dome of the Rock. It's not even a mosque, it's a shrine. But it's the third holiest place in all Islam, which makes that particular area the hottest piece of real estate in the world. The world could literally go to World War III over that piece of real estate, were it not for a guy showing up in the future prophetically who is going to make some sort of a deal for the Jews to rebuild their temple on that platform, where the Muslims venerated as their third holiest site after Mecca and Medina, that area right there. So it's a spectacular spot, and we do get a chance to go up there on our last day in Israel. But right at the base of it, you've got that, the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall. It's massive. Look at how big that is. And you know, in the time of Jesus, when King Herod the Great was still working on the project, he was dead, but his engineers kept working on it for another 60 years after his death, that wall on top went up another 50 feet, and from the level where people are standing, it goes down another 35. It was a massive wall. Some of the stones in the wall that are down below, which if you go on your free day, you can check it out in what's called the Rabbi's Tunnels. One of the stones is 47 feet long, 13 feet high, 18 feet thick, and weighs as much as a fully loaded jumbo jet. And yet it's put in with, if any of you are engineers or contractors, it's put in with half-inch tolerances. You could hit it with an A-bomb and it wouldn't move. It's absolutely a spectacular place. You can go there. They let you go there. There's a women's side. Women go to the women's side, men go to the men's side, and you can pray, you can just look around, you can investigate the people that are there praying, just treat them with respect, and you can just hang out all day. This is the southwest corner of the Temple Mount. Once again, it would have gone up much higher than what you see right there. And this is, you know, it's hard. I have a wide-angle lens on this thing that I took this picture, and I still couldn't get it all in the picture. But if you look at the stones that make up the corners, each one of those stones there are 120 tons each. And they stack up, offset by approximately an inch. Every stone level is set back in 1 inch, which actually holds the whole Temple Mount together, which is 35 acres. A platform that, once again, Herod the Great developed in remodeling the entire Temple Mount, because Solomon's temple, Ezra's temple afterwards, much smaller and a much smaller area. But Herod thought big, and he wanted to be remembered as a big guy, and so this is what he did there. We also go here, which is just a little bit to the east of that area. These are called the South Temple Steps. By the way, that guy in the black right there, I just needed to kind of clear something up. It's not me. It's a guy that some of you know. His name is Gail Irwin. And I've done a dozen tours with Gail Irwin, and that's him. He wrote the book, The Jesus Style. And that's one of the groups right there as he's teaching them. Up above, you have a mosque that's built on the top of the Temple Mount. That's the third holiest site in all Islam. That's called the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And that's a very, very important place to the Muslims. If you want to start a riot, all you got to do is say, oh, somebody did something bad to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and suddenly people are dying all over the place because they're very protective of it. But those steps where the people are sitting right there is the only certifiable place in all Jerusalem you can say absolutely for sure Jesus was here. Everything else has changed so much, we don't know exactly where he was. We just know he was in Jerusalem, in the old city. But those steps right there, that's the one place you can say he was there. You go up onto the Temple Mount, and as you ascend up there, you have this big shrine that's built over, allegedly, the Holy of Holies of the temple. But the Holy of Holies of the original temple, the Jews want to build a new temple there. That building has to get out of the way if you're going to build a new temple. That is a problem, isn't it? Because you damage that building, World War III starts in a few minutes. I mean, it's that touchy. However, as you walk around the Temple Mount, you find on the other side of the building that little dome. Underneath that little dome, 8 feet across, is a piece of bedrock sticking up that's actually 6 feet higher in elevation than the rock that's underneath that dome, which is alleged to be, again, the bedrock of the Holy of Holies of the temple. But the Holy of Holies of the temple was on the upper platform. This is all the upper platform. And it was at the highest point of the upper platform, right there. That's 100 meters north. And there's nothing there but that dome, and it's not that important to the Muslims. So very possibly, prophetically speaking, as history begins to wind up, as God does this, whenever he does it, we don't know when, But Daniel talked about it, Jesus talked about it, John talks about it in the book of Revelation, that probably that will be the Holy of Holies of the third temple when it's set up. And we get to go there and hang out and talk about these things a bit. Very interesting place to be. We go to the upper room. This is the upper room. This is the upper room here, sort of on the stage. The one on the stage is more authentic than this spot. This is a traditional location. That building right there that is commemorated as the upper room, not where the Holy Spirit descended on people on the day of Pentecost, but it's the upper room where Jesus actually had the Last Supper. That room is built by the Crusaders. That's 1,000 years, more than 1,000 years after the time of Jesus. But it's a good enough place to go to commemorate the Last Supper. But there is one thing about this. Underneath this building, this is the second floor. Underneath, there is layers of archaeology in another room. And it was hit by an artillery shell during the War of Independence. The part of the building, the back part, collapsed. Even though there was a war going on, archaeologists flocked to the place because they wanted to find out if it was real. And they discovered the foundations of a synagogue with a church built over the top of it, with the apse of the church, the altar of the church, and the ark where they would store the scrolls in the synagogue, all pointing towards where Jesus was buried and rose from the dead. That gives them a clue that that was a very, very special place, and it may actually be built right over the same cubic footage of air where the actual Last Supper took place. So, is it? We don't know. Would you say flip a coin? I'd say flip a coin, but it leans towards maybe 70 to 80%. This is actually where it was in this area, even though it's not the same building. There's the Last Supper. You walk through Old Jerusalem. The Arab merchants will sell you anything. I mean, it's just crazy. This happens to be my favorite. It's a cave of wonders, and that gives you an idea of some of the things they sell there. How about the Israel Museum and the map of Jerusalem? Look at this. They call it the model city. You want to know what Jerusalem was like in the days of Jesus? Some guy spent 25 years using only literature that described the layout of the city at the time of Jesus and at the time of the temple's destruction in 70 AD, which there wasn't much change between then, and he built this city on a 1/24 scale. It's a whole college education just walking around this thing and looking at it. It's absolutely marvelous. There's our guide Ronnie and my assistant pastor Jim as they're taking a look at this thing. Israel Museum. You also see the Dead Sea Scrolls there, some of them, in what's called the Shrine of the Book, which is right next to it. You go from the model city into the Shrine of the Book. How about the Garden of Gethsemane? Is this where Jesus prayed on that night? Within earshot of this, it could have been right here. It could have been maybe 50 yards away. We don't know exactly where because he didn't set up a monument saying, no, I prayed here and everybody venerate this spot. It just happens to be that they know where the Garden of Gethsemane was, and this is part of it. Some of the trees in there, they're very, very old. Well, olive trees, they can shed branches and branches can die, but the root systems never do. It's just not in their DNA. So were these trees there in the days of Jesus? Not the actual stuff above ground, but the root systems probably were, and they could probably tell you what they heard if they could speak when he prayed. Some places that we get to go on our free day. Ron went to this place here, and he and I went. It's a church called the Alexander Nevsky Church, or the Russian Church in Exile. While they were digging to put this church in about 150 years ago, they ran into this arch. It was built by the Emperor Hadrian. Fascinating place. And then this. That's my assistant pastor Jim peeking through. Jesus told his disciples when they said, who can go to heaven if a rich man can't get in? And he said, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. That's the eye of a needle. It's a secondary gate that you can only squeeze through if they close the main gate. To the left, you see that there's an open area and a metal railing there. It's just sort of a metal grate. And that area is part of an old gate, an ancient gate. If that gate was shut, that's the way in. If somebody's attacking the city, they block that up. That's all they had to do. But that's an eye of a needle, right out of the Bible. This place right here, on your free day, we have a free day in Jerusalem, full free day in Jerusalem and a half a free day. So you can see these places. This is the city of David. A lot of tours include the city of David as something that you go, you're already automatically, it's on your itinerary. We don't do that because the city of David is extremely claustrophobic. And there are a lot of people who don't like the tight spaces in the city of David. So I will personally lead you through it on our free day. And one of the first places you hit is, see that roof up there, the ceiling? The ceiling is just above that is the ticket booth where you buy your tickets to go through. And underneath it is that bedrock, King David's palace. From when he conquered Jebus and turned it into Jerusalem, that was his palace. You can actually walk right over the top of it. You can't walk on it actually, but that's it right there, and it's even in more places. You can see it there. Here's another part of it, King David's palace, right there, underneath the ticket sales. And then if you're on your free day and you want to go through Hezekiah's tunnel, well, it's kind of a tight squeeze, but as you're heading towards the tunnel, these folks wanted to go through, and then there was me too, so it was just 6 of us that day. What you're looking in the blue in the background, they just put some fancy lights on it, but this is a water tank that was like a cistern. A cistern is a stone water tank. It would have been lined with plaster. There would have been all kinds of silt and stuff at the bottom. It was contaminated water, but it was a water source for the people that came from the Gihon Spring, which is down below. They would actually get the water moved uphill to fill that tank. That is probably, once again, flip a coin, but it's probably the location where Jeremiah was put into that pit with the miry clay in it. It was probably that cistern right there, because by the time of Jeremiah, that cistern had been abandoned. It was only used for keeping prisoners in it. Further on, Hezekiah's tunnel, about 1.5 feet wide, ranging from 5 feet high to 25 feet high, depending on what section of the tunnel. Water up to your shin, except when you start, it comes up to your hip. There's a low spot you have to dip down into, so you're going to get wet. 577 yards long, no lights. You have to bring your own flashlight. It's history. It's in 2 places in the Old Testament specifically mentioned. Hezekiah arranged to build that tunnel. It's an engineering wonder. It was completed from 2 sides, meeting in the middle after digging for only 6 months through solid rock. Absolutely an incredible thing. We'll take you through that. When you come out the other side, you come out to this place. Look behind these people. You see that deck there, that stone deck, and it goes down and you see a dirt embankment there? That dirt embankment today is gone. After we took this picture last December, they started excavating back from that dirt embankment. What you're looking at is the Siloam pool. This is where Jesus sent the man after he smeared mud in his eyes, the man born blind. Go down to the Siloam pool and wash your eyes out. And this is where he did it, right here at the Siloam pool. They just sold the property to the Israeli Antiquities Authority, the Greek Orthodox Church, who owned that melon patch behind that hedge there, and now they're excavating that entire area soon. The entire pool, which will be dry, but the entire pool is going to be exposed. But this is where Hezekiah's tunnel originally came out. And then also in the city of David, on your free day I can take you there, these 2 monumental tombs are believed to be, and with a certain amount of authority, one is the tomb of Solomon and the other one is the tomb of King David. Their names aren't on it, there's nothing and nobody in there. But these are monumental tombs that were built into the Canaanite city back in the time, when about the same time that David conquered the city, when he changed the name from Jebus to Jerusalem in 1000 BC. And so this might be his tomb. We get to go there and we'll take a look at that. This is something that you need to know about. On a free day, we go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. We don't have it on the itinerary. If you've heard of it, it's the holiest site in all Christianity. It's the holiest artifact or relic in all Christianity, because it's a place where about 90% of all Christians, mostly traditional Christians, believe that the church was built over the rock where Jesus was crucified, and his tomb is encased inside this great big church. It's big, it's ugly, it's smelly. The 6 different Christian sects that are in there hate each other's guts. So it's not a nice place to go. If you want to see it, I take you there on your free day. But as you're about to enter the church, there's an arch to the left. You can see the stonework for the arch. I didn't need to show you that. That's just the main door. But you have this stairway that goes up to this little closed chapel. The chapel is elevated because if you go through that door and to the left, you're standing over Golgotha Rock. Whether it's the authentic rock or not is a moot point. Everybody seems to believe that it is. By the way, Jesus was not crucified on the rock. It never says it. He was crucified at the place of the skull. The rock marked the spot. He was crucified closer to where I'm standing when I took this picture, because there was a road there, and they always crucified people along a road. But that chapel right there was built over Calvary, and its official name historically is Calvary Chapel. That's it, right there. This is our guide, Ronnie, in the Valley of Elah, where David fought Goliath, right in this general area, and he demonstrates how to use a sling and hurl a rock, and he's really good at it. But that's where David fought Goliath, in the Elah Valley. Here's the Elah Valley again, and we had a whole bunch of young people coming through that were in high school or just out of high school that are about to go into the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. And they were hiking, and they're kind of getting in shape, and they let us take their picture. You run into all kinds of very interesting people who are super friendly there in the Valley of Elah. This is a place called Beit Juvrin. We threw this in because there was a location, sometimes politically or weather-wise, you can't get to some sites. We have, the disclaimer, if you want to call it that, is sometimes sites on the itinerary aren't accessible. And we had one day where we had 3 sites because of political things going on we could not get to. They wouldn't let us in. So we always have alternatives. And the Elah Valley was one, and Beit Juvrin is another. Never heard of Beit Juvrin? It's not in the Bible. But it's a Roman city that was down by the Valley of Elah, where David fought Goliath, but it's Roman, so it's 1,000 years later, and that is a gladiatorial combat arena. And we go in there and we get to talk about the martyrs, and you get a first-hand view of what their lives were like at the end of their lives. Fascinating place. This is another place that other tours don't go to, and as Ron knows, we try and go places that many tours don't go to. Obviously, many of the sites that I just showed you, they're just riddled with tourists. We have to go there too because they're the right places to go, so we want to go there. But we also go places people don't go. Right there, that old olive tree, and where the people are standing, they're standing in a sheepfold, a very, very, very old sheepfold. We don't know how old, but easily 2,000 to 4,000 years old. The tree in front of them, hundreds of years old. The city in the background, Bethlehem. We don't go to Bethlehem. A lot of groups do, we don't. Bethlehem is a miserable place to go, and even back in the time of Jesus and long before to the time of David, and today, Rand McNally, the Atlas people, they have it as #1 tourist disappointment in the entire world. And I've been there many times, and I totally agree with them. So it's better to see Bethlehem from a distance than it is to actually go into the city itself. But what's important about that is this. That sheepfold right there. There's garbage around the place because it's not a tourist site. It's a place where Israeli kids go to party or what have you. But there's a wall just to the left of that cave that extends out across the entrance to the cave. They still put sheep in there. People, Bedouins live in the area. They'll herd their sheep in there, and they just stack up the rocks properly, and they leave an opening for a gate. The shepherd lies down in the gate so that the sheep can't get out unless they cross over him. Jesus said what? I am the gate for the sheep. Now you understand what he meant by that. He wasn't talking figuratively. He was talking in a way that the people back then could thoroughly understand. So we visit a sheepfold. We visit this place, the only remnant of a road that was just outside the floor of the original Antonia fortress. If Jesus was flogged on this floor, he carried the cross on that road and bled all over it on his way to Calvary, on his way to Golgotha. We visit this place. It's called the Lithostratus. We end up at the Garden Tomb. We have communion and worship at the Garden Tomb. And you get to go inside. You can see how it's laid out. It's led by British missionaries who actually take you through this place in the middle of this very, very big, noisy city. The old city of Jerusalem is only about maybe a 3/4 of a square mile, but it has 35,000 people in it. Outside the old city, Jerusalem is now almost 1 million people, and it's just a big, noisy city. Here, you can hear a pin drop. It's just a beautiful place, and so we go to the Garden Tomb. This is our group from last year, meeting together. That's our guide, Ronnie, on the left, arguably the best guide in Israel. Chuck Smith used him every single year that Ronnie was available for him as his lead guide. So just an absolutely amazing thing. But that's not the end of the story, because we also do an extension that goes into Jordan. To get to Jordan, we cross at Eilat. If you've never heard of Eilat, it's at the Red Sea. It's at the very southern tip of Israel. And we cross there. But on the way there, we have to pass by a few things. This one, Beersheba. Beersheba's in the book of Genesis. Abraham was here. He dug a well here. Isaac was here. Jacob was here. This is really hardcore Old Testament stuff. This well over here that Jim is looking at, there's a well just behind that wood right there. That is what they call Abraham's well. It's a well that's easily 3,800 years old. It's deep. You drop a rock into it and it falls for a really long time, and it's empty now. But it falls for about 150 feet. And that's there in Beersheba. It's a very important place biblically, also politically today. People want to make peace treaties in the Middle East between Arabs and Jews. They tend to come here to do it because Abraham was the father of both. Animal life. This is also on the way down to Eilat, where we cross into Jordan. Ibex. These are goats. They're mountain goats. And these are males. They have these huge, huge antlers on these things, big horns. I mean, it's like a forest of them out there. And you can walk right up to them. You be careful, because if they ram you, you can tell it will hurt. But they're right out there in the desert. This is where I'm standing when I took this picture. I'm standing on a sidewalk next to a parking lot. That's how close they get. Ibex. We go through the Ramon crater. It's a huge crater in Israel. Beautiful. It's not like the craters here. This is entirely different. We go through that one and have a great time with that. This is one of our people. I wanted to show you this because you get to go out for one day. We give you a complete free day when you're in Aqaba, which is the Jordanian side of the Red Sea, just north of Saudi Arabia in the Saudi border. And you get to go snorkeling over the reefs in the Red Sea with a glass bottom boat. Here are the people snorkeling way out in the Red Sea. What you're seeing in the background, that mountain, that's Egypt in the background. And to your left, you see a little bit of mountain coming out up at the very top on the left. That's Saudi Arabia. And you're actually in the country of Jordan right there. And in your glass bottom boat, you see some interesting things underwater. I didn't know Pharaoh had tanks, but there is one right there. You go to a place called Wadi Rum. Ever heard of Wadi Rum? If you've seen movies, you've seen Wadi Rum. Some of the movies that were filmed there, The Martian, all three of the last Star Wars movies, the new Dune movie, and Lawrence of Arabia. And Lawrence of Arabia was actually here, and chances are Moses and the children of Israel were here too. They would have known about this place. There's a water table underneath this. But it's an unearthly place. We go there, this is what it looks like. I mean, we'll take jeeps in, and you get all the way in there, and you have tea with the Bedouins. This is my assistant pastor, Jim, mugging for the camera, and of course at Wadi Rum just showing off, and everybody's taking his picture like Moses parting the Red Sea, which was not that close. Once again, there's part of our group there, and Mark, my administrator, helping out there too with the group. You can ride camels. They charge you for those. You got to pay $20 to ride it. But these aren't tourist camels. These are authentic Bedouin herds. And the Bedouins will actually lead you out there. And they take you over to all kinds of cool places there. We go to have a Bedouin lunch with the Bedouins. The Arabs in Jordan are mostly Bedouins. Incredibly friendly people. And that meal right there, they just pulled right out of the ground. It was in an oil drum, and they burn all kinds of, the proper wood down there to smoke it. It's just like a barbecue. And then they bury it all day long. And then at the end of the day, which is here, they just take the lid off and they pull it out and you feast. It's just a tremendous time. Traditional Jordanian food. This area here, if you look way in the background, in the haze back there, that's Israel. In between, there's a big valley called the Arava. It's a giant earthquake fault that runs all the way from Turkey. It's the one that moved, that killed all those people recently, all the way down to Tanzania. It's a giant earthquake fault. This whole area here was affected by that earthquake over the centuries. And you can tell, as I like to describe this area as basically the Grand Canyon in a blender. It's just an incredibly rugged place. Who would possibly live there? Well, you get to go in there, and we'll take you in. And you've got these massive canyons. You can see there's something carved by the guy with the white hat. And once again, my assistant pastor, Jim. That's it's a shrine for an idol. You can see to the right caves up there and steps that are carved out for priests to attend to that shrine as people would be coming through that gap. And as you're coming through the gap, it's huge, it's deep. You're 250 feet below the top of this little tiny crack, which was an earthquake crack. That slice behind, that was an aqueduct where water would be brought into this area. And then, of course, this picture, I loved it because look at the faces of those guys down there. There were students from my Bible college, and they're looking up, and their jaw dropped because they're looking at that as you come through. And this is Petra. It's a Nabatean city of vast proportions. Today, it's just sandy desert. but in the day when it was flourishing, it was a trading post of enormous, enormous function and size. And they had vineyards, they had animals, they had crops, they had orchards in this whole area. And it's a vast, vast place that you come into. They were all tombs, these great big places. This is not a palace. It's not a temple. You saw it in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. What you saw on the inside is a movie set. There's nothing in there but just barren little hallways, and it's ugly. So the Jordanians don't let people in there anymore. But it's a huge thing. And it's a tomb of King Aretas the Fourth, who is in the book of Acts. He's the guy whose governor threatened Paul, and so they had to lower Paul through a hole in the wall in a basket out of Damascus. Remember? In the book of Acts. It was King Aretas who actually wanted to kill Paul. Chances are he wanted to kill Paul because when Paul was in the Arabian desert, guess where this is? This is the Arabian desert. He's not walking out into a dry desert to starve or die of thirst. He's going to a place like this because that's the kind of guy Paul was. He was around cities and metropolises and whatever, and I think he stepped on King Aretas' toes with the gospel at some point. So that's a theory, but it holds a lot of water. This is a tomb. They call it the urn tomb for various reasons that you have to climb up to get into it. It was turned into a church by the Byzantines. Byzantines are late Roman Christians, and they carved it out. This entire room is not built. It's carved out of rock. You're looking at bedrock. This is what it looks like. There is not one thing in this room that was constructed. It was all carved. This is another tomb. You got to hike up to this one. It's definitely optional because it's a huge hike. This is called the monastery. And that thing is 50 yards tall, 45 yards wide. Not feet, yards. It's gigantic. And this is another tomb in Petra. This is the Jordanian desert. You got to drive through this at one point. Barren land, just beautiful, but very, very barren. We go to a place called Madaba. This mosaic that you see on the floor, oh, not another mosaic. I don't care about those. You got to understand, we stop at this church. It's a Greek Orthodox church. This mosaic is from the 6th century AD. In other words, from around 500 AD, not BC. But it's the Dead Sea Scrolls of maps. If you want to find anything in the ancient Middle East to dig up, you look at that map and it tells you where to dig. Because it has all the different cities and towns and villages that existed from the time of Jesus up to 500 AD on that map, what's left of it. And we get the chance to see that. And we go to Mount Nebo. This is a Catholic church on Mount Nebo, but they built it over an ancient Byzantine church. Look at the inside of this place. I want one of these. This is amazing. This is another view of it. Look, they found these mosaics on the floor where this church was built, and they were in layers. You can see mosaics to the right on the floor. Those are the ones they found on top. So they peeled them off, mounted them, and put them on the walls. You get to go in this place, take pictures. It's absolutely beautiful. Again, we don't advocate going into a lot of churches, but this is a must-see because of the things that they have in there. And of course, the last stop that we have before we cross back into Israel and then go to have a big feast on the Israeli side in a place called Abu Ghosh at an Arab restaurant, and then we go to the airport. This mound right here just wrapped up its last what they call season of excavations. It's been being excavated for 16 seasons with 3 years skipped because of COVID and complications from all of that. This happens to be in Jordan, Sodom. They found it. This is what it looks like. It's not a tourist stop, not yet. We take our people there because nobody else ever goes there. And we can't always get up on there. Sometimes we can only do a drive-by. If it's raining, we can't get there. If there's a political problem, we can't go up there because the neighborhood next door can get really uppity with political problems. When things are quiet, it's fine. But we go up on this place and we have a Bible study right there on Sodom, and we get to talk about why in the world God really destroyed it, which is far more than what you may think. So it's an amazing place. It's an authentic site, 100%. That's Sodom. So this is the last picture I'm going to show you here, and then I'll open it up for questions if you have any. But this picture is our group, and there's a man underneath that brown sign wearing like a flannel shirt. You see him? He's the pastor, an 81-year-old pastor of an evangelical free church in Madaba, Jordan. Madaba, Jordan has a lot of churches, not just Greek Orthodox, but they have Nazarene churches, Pentecostal churches, Christian Missionary Alliance churches, and he's the pastor of one of them. So he's in a completely Muslim country with a Christian congregation. We ran into him on the street. Our guide spotted him and said, "You need to meet this man. He's my pastor." And so we have some really cool encounters there, and we just got our group taken with him, group picture taken with him. It was just a spectacular moment, meeting him and talking with him. We have a great time. So that's Israel. Now look, it's 7:43, so I went about maybe 5 minutes over from when we actually started. Let me ask you this. Ron, you shut me down whenever you're ready. Does anybody have any questions?
I do.
Yes, please.
I thought the Bible said that not one stone would be upon another,
Yes.
and yet the Jews are there praying to this wall that they're saying they're from the temple,
Yes.
and those are stones on top of each other.
Well, what it says in the scripture, let me go back to this picture because I can bring it up. It is right. Well, let's do this one here. You have this one, and then you have this one. You're looking at the retaining wall around the outside of the Temple Mount. That's the retaining wall. The western wall, the Wailing Wall, you see the wall right in front of you, facing you, not the one that's all lit up, but the one facing you, the exact opposite side. That's the Wailing Wall. You just hop over the top and then turn around, and that's the Wailing Wall. This is the retaining wall for the entire 35-acre platform. The temple, as you can tell from this picture here, is a good way to put it. There is no temple. It's completely gone. When the Romans broke into the Temple Mount during the last final siege of Jerusalem, they actually tore down the Antonia fortress all the way to the ground. That's why when we visit the Antonia fortress, you only have the floor, because the Romans obliterated it. They used it to build a siege ramp. The Antonia fortress was built on an outcropping of rock that Herod, King Herod the Great, had carved a cliff in order to level the platform out, because it was a hill that kind of went up, and he just cut it like that and put the temple here and then put the Antonia fortress on the cliff. So it was very, very secure. And when the Jews had finally retreated into the Temple Mount, which was a fortress because Herod had built the second temple, the one that we're talking about, that was destroyed, the one that you're talking about, that Jesus pointed out, he built it like a fortress, like a massive fortress, like a keep, because he was paranoid. So that even though it was the holy place for the Jews, if anything ever went wrong in his lifetime, and this turns out it was 70 years after his lifetime when this happened, but he could retreat to that as a last stand because it was so formidably built. The temple of Herod, the temple of Solomon was about 35 feet tall. Herod's temple was 160 feet tall. It was a skyscraper. It was huge. And the footprint of it was massive, and then it had a wall around it, a wall around that, and then the Temple Mount retaining wall with a 70-foot high wall on all sides at the top. It was massive. It was a fortress. So when Jesus was talking, the guys are saying, look at these giant stones. They're talking about the temple itself. It even says so. It doesn't say about the whole platform, just the temple. And Jesus said there will come a day when not one stone will be left standing on another. And when the temple caught fire, the Romans had torn down the Antonia fortress, built a siege ramp that went downhill. Usually it goes uphill. They built one that went downhill onto the Temple Mount, invaded the Temple Mount, caused the Jews to retreat inside the Temple Mount, the temple enclosure, which had the temple in it. So it was like a giant fortress, 7,000 Jews in there, and a Roman soldier accidentally lit a curtain on fire with a flaming arrow, and it caught the whole complex on fire because stone is reinforced with wood. That's how it held the thing together. That's part of the engineering. The wood catches fire, tapestries hanging all over the place that people had donated to the thing, that caught on fire. The entire east face of this 160 foot high temple was plated with gold so that you couldn't look at it before noon because it would blind you. It was just glaring because it was just glorious because it was all gold. When it caught fire, all the gold melted down into the stones, and in between the rubble, the temple itself collapsed, incinerating 7,000 Jews, and the Romans got in there and peeled it back one stone at a time in order to get the gold. But they didn't get to keep it because Vespasian comes along and he says, we're taking the gold to Rome. So they packed it all up, all the chunks that they found, the whole now the whole Temple Mount is laid waste, and the temple is gone. The retaining wall is still mostly there, you know, and it's been changed, improved, rebuilt over the centuries. But the retaining wall was not the temple. It never was. It's the temple itself. The rest of the gold was taken off to Rome, and they recently found, as in 20 years ago, a stone with the dedication plaque for the Colosseum that says, "This structure built with the gold of the temple." The legacy of the temple in Jerusalem appears to be the Colosseum in Rome. That's what financed it. So when you say that not one stone is on another, that's absolutely fact. The temple was completely taken apart. Even Josephus attests to this. The Temple Mount retaining wall was never completely destroyed. It's been partly destroyed, mostly rebuilt over the centuries. So that's what you're looking at when you see, for instance, even this. This is the lower part of the southern part of the retaining wall. And you can see the big stones at the bottom, and they get progressively smaller at the top. That tells you that part was rebuilt. So that's what it is. Somebody else. Ron, do we have time for a few more? Okay, right in front, we'll go next.
Yeah, you mentioned that Herod built the temple.
Yes.
And you mentioned that it was around the time of Jesus, right?
Yes.
Okay, but Jesus was called out of Egypt as a young man.
Yes.
A boy, right?
Mhm.
And he went to Nazareth, right?
Yes.
So when the Bible states that those who were trying to kill you were dead,
Yes.
was that Herod?
That was Herod the Great. Herod the Great had died. They were in Egypt. By the way, I don't want.
Calvary, he called himself.
Right. I don't want to confuse you with this, but I'm going to tell you something that you're going to read. You go into Wikipedia, you go into commentaries, you're going to find that you will hear every historian, Christian sometimes and non-Christian all the time, they will tell you that King Herod the Great died in 4 BC. He did. Our dating's wrong, not theirs. So Jesus was born probably around 6 BC. And so we say, well, that doesn't match our dates. It doesn't have to. People have tampered with the calendar, the Julian calendar, the Gregorian calendar, other calendars over the centuries. But if we add it all up, it comes out to about 4 BC, which puts Jesus' birth about 6 BC. He wasn't born in the year 0. That's all tradition. That's all Christian tradition throughout the ages. So, but it's hard for our brains to grasp because we don't think that way. None of us do. I'm telling you this, and some of you are going, I have a problem with that. I have a problem with that. I'm not trained to think that way. We aren't in the West. That's just the deal. But the calendars have been messed up over the centuries, but they can actually confirm when Herod died because they found his tomb, they found everything else. I mean, they know when he died. And Jesus was definitely affected by Herod. Remember, he wanted to kill all the boys 2 years and younger in Bethlehem, which means that Jesus could have been 2 years old by the time Herod put that death sentence, and he probably died the same year later on in the year. Jesus could have been born even earlier than that. Don't gauge our calendars as this is when the birth of Christ took place. We go by what history tells us. He was definitely born about 2 years or more before King Herod the Great died. But when he died, they came back. And they came back to another problem. They couldn't go back to Bethlehem because there was another Herod in power named Archelaus. And Archelaus, his goal was to be more of a tyrant than his father. And so that's why they went back up to Nazareth, so they could avoid Archelaus, because Nazareth was out of his jurisdiction. Okay, somebody, yes.
Along with gold,
Yes.
thousands and thousands of war prisoners were taken back to Rome.
Yes.
They were the construction crew that built the Colosseum.
They weren't. And the reason why is the Colosseum was built under Hadrian. Hadrian was 135 AD. Vespasian was 70 AD. So there's a huge gap in time there. You have Vespasian. You have three other Caesars that they went through 4 Caesars in about a year. Vespasian gets there, he dies, Galba comes along, and Galba was first, after Nero, and then Vespasian, and then Valerian, not Valerian, anyway, 2 other guys. And then you have, after them, you got, well, anyway, it goes on and on until you finally get to Titus. Came into. He was after Titus was Vespasian's son, so he becomes emperor as well. After these other emperors were in there, then he was in for a few years, and like I said, it goes on. But finally, you come to Hadrian, and Hadrian builds the Colosseum. So the stuff was banked, the gold was banked for a long time. And then the Colosseum is built over a spot where Nero had set up a colossus of himself in that spot, which was pretty much the hub or the center of all activity coming in and out of the Forum. And of course, Nero was despised. They tore that thing down, and then they built the Roman Colosseum, which is a gladiatorial combat arena, and they just named it the Colosseum after Nero, or after his statue anyway, because that's where it was located.
I was misinformed. I thought Titus did the ribbon cutting.
No, he didn't. It was much later than that. Yeah, but I get where you're going with that for sure. Anybody else? Let me answer one question before we get off of here. You're probably wondering, and I don't want to be the one to ask the question, is it safe? Yes. Say, what about the news? Don't watch the news. The news, any news, except for a few news sources which are really quite objective, news is entertainment. They run on ratings. They want people to sponsor them, so they have product sponsorship and all of that. And so they will run the most spectacular stories they can or exaggerate in some way that will get people to say, oh, wow, isn't that great? So a kid throws a rock in Israel and the world is coming to an end. All the turmoil that you've been seeing in Israel is internal, and it's internal politics. It has nothing to do with the Palestinians at all. It has to do with their Supreme Court. And their Supreme Court and the issues going on there, and I don't want to get into all of that. But now it's stopped because Netanyahu backed off. But Jerusalem, including the Old City, is the only major city that I've been to. I get a chance to go a lot of places in the world. It's the only major city in the world that I will walk down the streets alone in the middle of the night, and I have no fear. It's quite an amazing place. So there are places in Israel, there are rough neighborhoods there. We don't go there. When was the last time you heard of a tourist with a group getting shot at or killed? At least 45 years. Tourists are not targets over there. When the Palestinians are shooting at somebody or knifing somebody or trying to ram somebody, they're usually connected with Hamas in the West Bank, or perhaps even Hezbollah in the north. Those are terror groups, and Hamas is well embedded in the West Bank and Gaza. But they go after known Hasidic Jews that are dressed very, very typically, so you can spot them in a crowd, or they will go after IDF soldiers and policemen. But they don't go after tourists, because if the tourists stop coming, they starve, because they make all the souvenirs. That's where they're manufactured, in the West Bank. And then they're imported into Israel, and they're sold to the tourists. So if the tourists stop coming, everybody's in bad shape, including them. So the only people that would care about that, or not care about that, is ISIS. And they haven't got a foothold there yet. So anyway, you want to follow up?
The other question I had was about vaccination, because they were...
No vax. No vax. They stopped it.
For a while, yeah, they were requiring a vaccination.
They did. I had to actually get a test before I went over and came back. Because look, I do missions. I got vaccinated. I hope that doesn't offend you, but I had to, or I don't do missions. The message has to go out. Somebody's got to take it out there. You run the risk. Just get it done and get out. So I hope I didn't alienate some of you by saying this. It's not like I approve of it. I didn't like it. But if I needed to stay on mission, I got to do something. So I got over there. To get back, I have to take another test. I mean, it was that way. Even when we went to Turkey and Greece, this last April, it was almost a year ago, we were March and April, and you had to be vaccinated to get over there, and you had to take a test within 24 hours of getting on the plane in order to get on a plane to get home. And you had to wear a mask on the plane. I hated it. It was terrible. And the funny part was that we had, of our group that went over to Greece, they got tested. Half of them tested positive. They got an extra 2 weeks in Greece, in Athens. And they didn't really want to be there. So that's how bad it got. Now, nobody's asking for tests. Nobody's checking for vaccinations. Just go. No masks, just go. And that's the way it is. And I'm really, really happy about that. So just thought I'd let you know. Anything else? Okay. Pastor Ron.
You know, one thing I'd like to say is when you go into Israel now, it's easier to get into Israel than ever before. When we went, I'm just amazed how I almost walked right through. You had to wait in these long lines. You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Getting in and getting
Yep.
And it's amazing to say there are places that you don't want to go, like you mentioned, Bethlehem. I've been there, you've been there.
Yeah.
And we have a common friend I met from Jay that took me all through the West Bank and everything. And tell them the story about if you have an Arab friend, what that is like to go into the West
Right.
Bank.
We don't do this on our tours because we don't have we just don't have a big enough umbrella to cover the whole tour. But I have a friend whose name is Yusuf Khalil, and he is a Palestinian Arab from Bethlehem. By the way, when you hear Palestinian Arab, all that means is they used to be Jordanians. The West Bank is the West Bank of Jordan, you see. Now it's Israel, but and it's occupied territory is what people are calling it politically, but it's unannexed territory for Israel. And he's from there. He's from Bethlehem. His ancestors grew up in Bethlehem. And he's a Christian. He graduated from Bethlehem Bible College with a master's degree in theology. By the way, they do not teach Old Testament. He knew nothing about the Old Testament because it says the Jews own the land. Very interesting. But Yusuf loves Jesus. And he's super friendly, and I will tell you, I don't know this to mean a slam against any of perhaps your ethnic background or national backgrounds, but there is no hospitality in the world like Arab hospitality. It's absolutely through the roof. And Yusuf, when you get in the car with him, you get in his car, you are now under his care. You're part of his family. So that when he drives you around and you go to these different sites, like going into Nablus. Nablus is a hot zone. As an American, you don't want to show your face in Nablus. They'll kill you. You know, you're with Yusuf, they'll leave you alone. And they'll bless Yusuf. Because Yusuf has you as like family. This is the way they see. If you're with somebody from their territory and they have said, this is my friend, your family, and they will not touch you. They will honor that. So this is how it works. So we got a chance to go, not Ron and I, but Ron separately and me, got a chance to go to ancient Shechem, an amazing place. I wish we could take a tour in there. We can't. It's not safe, so we don't do it. But I wish we could. And Yusuf took me in there. Nobody batted an eye. We went to a restaurant. Nobody batted an eye. We went to get some kanafa, one of the greatest desserts ever invented. And you can only get it among the Arabs. And we went there. Whole place is full of Arabs. We turned every head in the house when we walked in there. Like, what are those guys doing in there? Because if I could be so bold as to say, with me and my friend Britt and my friend Mark, you will not find 3 whiter-skinned people in all of Israel. And we walked into this place, turned every head, and then everybody went back to eating. We had a wonderful time and conversations with people, and so it can be that way.
One other thing is when you have a free day, one of the things I have found is just like Ed is sitting here, you want to sit out in the community and you want to watch people.
Absolutely.
You know, you're there for the biblical sites, but you are to learn and understand about the culture. And they're so, they hustle, they're fast, they're everything, but they're very gracious, they're very kind. I remember the first time I went on my own, I was taking a train to the airport from Tel Aviv. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't speak any Hebrew, and they kept watching me. Some of the people said, well, where are you going? And I said, just sit back, relax. We'll tell you when you get there. They're always wanting to help you. It's not like what you see, as he says on the news. They're
Not at all.
Very gracious.
Yep. The news just spectacularizes everything because they're trying to sell ratings so they get more sponsors. And and the best way to do that is to sow fear. And that's what they're good at. So I have no problem going over there, short of a full-scale war going on. But I was over there, I'll just say this. I was over there in 2000 when an event happened called the Second Intifada. It comes on slowly, but it's an uprising among the Arabs. They're threatening to have one now. It hasn't happened, but basically the Arabs kind of shut things down in the West Bank, and it becomes very violent against the Jews, but not against tourists. And at the beginning of the Second Intifada, I took a group that started out as 88 people, 2 buses with Gail Irwin, and then everybody dropped out because they were watching the news. We went over with 33 people. It was the smallest tour that we'd ever done. We saw in the entire country only 2 other tourist buses. Usually there are thousands of them. We saw 2. and we had the entire country to ourselves, never heard a bullet, never heard an explosion, and signs were up in merchant shops saying special discounts for brave Americans, because they knew what we were seeing on TV, and we came over anyway. And it was quiet and peaceful. It was amazing. We had every single site to ourselves. So the worse it is in the news, the better it can be for us up to a point. And then sometimes, a couple of times, we've had to cancel tours because of politics. It just happened. But, usually doesn't happen. Fantastic thing. I'm not trying to be a salesman here, but I do these things, these orientations for Israel. By the way, when I do an Israel tour, I don't get paid for it. That's not why I do it. My goal is to get people over there. Because if you see Israel, and I take you to the places we go, you will come back reading an entirely different Bible. And you'll come back wanting to read it more than ever, voraciously, because suddenly things in there that were just words or parts of Sunday school lessons have explosive meaning now. And it changes everything. It changes the way you see not only the Scripture, but the way that you understand God. He is so much bigger and more amazing and more full of grace than you could have ever known. The events of the Bible, they're much bigger or more spectacular, or in some cases more intimate when you see these things. So I'm really, it's God's one of, I do a lot of things. I wear a lot of different hats. But as far as God saying I can do this and allowing me to do this for the last almost 30 years now, 25 years, how many times have I been to Israel? The answer is not enough. Not enough. And my church loves it, because every time I go over, I get to bring whole new stories back to them that are from the Bible, that open up the Scriptures and help them to understand the Scriptures better. And remember, the Bible is a revelation. It reveals God. That's why He gave it to us. He didn't give us the Bible to confuse us. He didn't give us the Bible to hide Himself in it. He gave us the Bible to reveal Himself in it. The more you know the Bible, the more you know God. It's that simple. That's why I can't wait for the next tour. And if you can come along, I really hope you can. You can talk to Ron about that. He has or will have all the details, and people are signing up for it right now. It leaves, I typically leave. There are a lot of groups that go over. A whole bunch of people are going over now. It's great. I typically leave this year. It'll be from San Francisco is where my group comes from the west coast of the mainland. And we leave on Sunday night about 7:30 or 8 o'clock on a nonstop flight out of San Francisco to Tel Aviv. This avoids weather delays and lost luggage. I love it. It's a 14-hour flight, so, take a sleeping pill and enjoy. But that's what we do. And Ron has a similar setup where he goes into either LA or San Francisco, and people meet me over there. And that's how we get together. But I hope you can come, because you will become missionaries after this. Not necessarily going to Africa and preaching to people there or something like that, but just to people around you. You'll be able to tell them so much more about God, and authoritatively who He is and how much He loves us and what He did with His only Son. And you can even describe, I was there where these things happen. And let me tell you about it. If you had any doubts, I can tell you this is the procedure that they would have done, because I was there. I saw how they did it. It's wonderful.
Any more questions? Let's give Jay a hand then. Tomorrow night, we're doing the biblical dinner. These tables will be, we'll have tablecloths on them. You'll come in. 6 o'clock food will be all lined up on here. Finger kind of food. Bring your fingers, okay? Jay will open for a little while, then we'll be serving, and, at a certain point, the lamb and the chicken. But it's all about culture. It's all about understanding what it was like 2,000 years ago. And encourage you to come. If you can't come, encourage someone else to come. But it's eye-opening. So,
if I can just add a simple description. It's not a Seder. I love Seders. They're important. But because a lot of these are done, what this is a recreation of the actual Last Supper, the way it would have really happened, and you're in it. That's what we're doing. And it's, if you want to know, well, what part of it are we doing? Think John 13. You say, what's in John 13? Go read it. That's your homework. But it will change everything. I've done this, this biblical dinner hundreds, if not maybe a couple of thousand times. I never kept track of how many times. And everybody who comes said, I will never, ever think of Jesus the same way again. I didn't know he loved me that much. So hopefully you'll come.
There's also a movie going to be coming out probably the next year. You want to tell them about that?
Yeah. For some reason, and I'm very blessed by it, Brent Miller Jr., who owns Ingenuity Films, made a movie out of what we're doing on Friday night, The Galilean Wedding. And it came out under the title, he picked the title, Before the Wrath. And it's based on a book that I wrote and a presentation that we're doing. But tomorrow night, the biblical dinner, he's made a movie out of that too. But only a portion of it. If he had made the whole thing, it would have been an epic miniseries, and he doesn't want to do The Chosen. So he's doing the very significant part of the biblical dinner that involves Judas and Peter that we talk about. And it's called Eating with the Enemy. I picked that title. So that when you see Eating with the Enemy, you can actually see a trailer for it out on YouTube if you just type in Eating with the Enemy trailer. It's incomplete because it's the dramatic parts of it. It makes it look like it's almost The Chosen, but it's a documentary, and there's like 20 different people being interviewed in it, including me, and a lot of people whose names you would probably know. George Barna of Barna Polls, he's on it. So a lot of people being interviewed for it, and the dramatic aspects of it. But that drama part is in the trailer, and the trailer is really good. So Eating with the Enemy, and hopefully it'll be out soon. Just pray for it.
One more thing. Tell them about the Friday night. We're going to carry the bride in.
Friday night, we need some volunteers, don't we?
We have a bride.
We have a bride. Okay.
Yeah, she's right here.
Fantastic. Oh, good.
Her husband.
Very good. Well, Ron can tell you that we need volunteers, and it would be great if we had about 12 people, 6 men, 6 women, and then I coach you what to do. You don't have any lines. You do have to yell and scream a lot, but you don't have any lines. I mean, anybody here you've always had people around you saying, calm down, be quiet. Yeah, you've heard that, right? This is your chance to get back at them. You can make as much noise as you can. We want the volcano to fear us, okay? So we're talking about a lot of noise. And I'm talking about just the 12 people that will help out on Friday night. If you'd like to volunteer for that, please see Pastor Ron. We got another one right here. So 6 men, 6 women, and the rest of you come and watch what happens. And it's again, if you saw the movie Before the Wrath, this is what it's all about. Before the Wrath is based on this presentation. That's where Brent Miller got it. So